Where is he?
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes,
Yes.
I see. Mhm.
can't speak for everybody. Yes, I can.
Okay, so I will be talking about reconciling Torah and ethical norms. Lessons from Rav Shmuel Glasner, the Dor Revi'i. And this will be in memory of my grandfather. And this whole presentation is adapted from an article by Rabbi Ethan Tucker. So when Torah conflicts with morality, a core dilemma. What happens when Torah values, something that the Torah prescribes, some Jewish law, seems to conflict with something that society considers moral or something that our innate morality considers something to do. And they go in two diverging paths. So what do we do? So I would I would like to bring a case. Rabbi Moshe Shmuel Glasner um, can bring some guidelines to what to do when this diverging path happens. So
Oh,
the first two was what was that? So
Go
what?
ahead. Go ahead, Eve. Go ahead.
So first two was Rabbi Moshe Shmuel Glasner. He was an early 20th century rabbi who lived in Hungary. He was a Zionist advocate and founding member of Mizrahi, despite opposition from Orthodox peers, one of whom was the Klausner Rebbe. And he wrote a commentary on Halacha titled Dor Revi'i, which means the fourth generation. And this title was inspired by Genesis, and they shall return here in the fourth generation.
oh, excuse me.
And so there's a double meaning to this title, Dor Revi'i. So one, if he was the fourth generation from the Khatam Sofer, who's considered one of the founders of Haredi Judaism, and also because he was a Zionist, and this verse speaks about returning to the land after the fourth generation. So since he was a Zionist, he wanted to take on that. So first we have a case, something in Jewish law called a Ben Pakuah, which
Hmm.
Google or will translate as to a fetus found alive. And this is a case where if a mother cow is pregnant and slaughtered according to the kosher law, and the fetus is still found alive, can you eat the fetus? So here there's a diagram. You can imagine this cow was slaughtered, and
Poor
then you
thing.
have the fetus alive inside.
Mhm.
So what are some reasons that might be yes, you can? What are your initial thoughts? What do you think? What does the audience think?
Goes against our sensibilities.
Can you explain more? Why like what do you think like why is that against our sensibility?
It's like eating an infant of any animal seems just to be immoral.
So need this bill. I have a technical issue. And if the fetus is found alive, you can't. In theory, the next step for me would be is can you kosher kill the fetus in a kosher way, and that would qualify it to be acceptable.
Yeah,
Can
that's
can
an
it be
excellent
shechted? Is
point.
that the right word? Shechted? Shechted?
I think so. But yeah, that's a great point because it's not a fully developed animal, right? Like we know how to fully shecht a fully grown animal, but a
Correct.
fetus there might not even be a kosher way to shecht it. So
Right. So the
that's a
question is
great point,
yes.
Bill.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And also great point. I missed who made the first point about that it's immoral?
It was
Gary
me,
Steve. That was Gary
Gary.
Steve.
Gary, yes, great point as well. So these are actually points that the Dor Revi'i actually is dealing with, and what he was dealing with in the 19th century. So first, to answer your question, Bill, the Gemara concludes that um, you are allowed to eat the fetus, and you don't have to. You don't have to shecht it in a kosher way. You can just
Oh,
kill it because it came from the mother cow, which was shechted in a kosher way. So
Okay.
there's not a problem there. According to halacha, fully acceptable. But then to Gary's point, it could be viewed as immoral. And in 19th century Europe and when the Dor Revi'i lived, that's exactly what the European society was thinking.
Well,
They
even
had laws
today,
that banned the consumption of this Ben Pakuah.
so we're in the 21st century. There are countries in Europe that have banned kashrut slaughter today in this century.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I think we'll discuss that later. How far? Let's see what Rabbi Glasner says, and then
Okay.
how far does the principle of reconciling Torah and what society considers to be moral, how far does that go? So I think we'll touch upon that. That's great as well. But let's focus on our case right now, where the Torah says that you're allowed to eat this, and the society says that it's immoral. And Rabbi Glasner says, does anybody want to read? Okay, so I can read it.
I'll read it. Neve, I'll read
okay.
it.
Go.
Moreover, if one eats things that are disgusting and reviling, even if the Torah has not forbidden them, he is more abominable than one who violates an explicit biblical prohibition. If one violates anything agreed upon as abominable by the enlightened, even if it is not explicitly forbidden by the Torah, they are worse than one who violates the laws of the Torah.
So we see here that Rav Glasner was truly against the people, those butchers who were selling that meat, even though it's clearly allowed by the Torah. And this can be a really revolutionary idea that Torah cannot be viewed as immoral by the rest of society. And it's strong enough to declare what the Talmud and the previous rabbis have unanimously declared as kosher, and now it becomes unkosher. Now, how far does this principle go? We'll have to discuss, because like you mentioned, Bill, what if the society is deeming like the actual laws of kashrut, like something that's much more, not only something that's permissible to eat, like this is a case of something that's permissible to eat, and then we're saying you can't. But in the laws of kashrut, that's saying that's something that we have to do in order to eat something, and they're viewing that as not. So we can discuss that later. But first, I want to bring another case that the Dor Revi'i brings up. So imagine you are stranded on a desert island, and you have nothing to eat. You're starving, and you have two options to eat something. You can eat pig meat, or you can eat somebody that you were stranded with unfortunately passed away, and there is dead human meat to consume. And this isn't just a made-up dilemma, a case. There's historical examples where people who were surviving had to resort to cannibalism. Here's a picture of the Donner Party, American pioneers in the 1840s. And then here's a picture of a memorial to the Uruguay flight in the 1970s, which crashed in the Andes Mountain, and they also had to resort to cannibalism.
I think you should point out, Neve, that in some of these cases, not in these two, but in cases of British people on a ship where they ate dead corpses, they were prosecuted when they got back to land. They were prosecuted by the government.
Thank you for sharing, Safta.
Yeah.
So there's cases where people did that and they were prosecuted. So that clearly can show that obviously it's viewed as cannibalism can be viewed as something immoral, and I think something that all of us can see now. But something that you might think would complicate it, there's a Torah prohibition, like the verses in the Bible actually prohibit eating pig. So that's a pretty strong prohibition. And then it turns out that the prohibition to eat the dead human meat is only a rabbinic prohibition, so a lesser prohibition. So I want to ask you, the audience, what do you think is the correct thing to do in this stranded island case?
Well, doesn't the Torah say that the sanctity of human life is paramount and that you can violate rules of the Torah to save a life? And if you're going to starve to death in lieu of eating that pig, isn't that a prohibition in and of itself?
Yes, that's correct. So this is a case where you're gonna have to, it's pure nefesh. You're allowed, like you said, like saving a life. You're allowed to do anything to save your life. But the question is, in this case, where if you want to save your life, but there's a way to do it in a one that's slightly less prohibited. So like maybe like you're breaking a sin, but which like the lesser sin to break.
Well, personally, I'd go with the pig.
Yes, right. That's the innate human thing to do, right? That you would want to eat the pig, and that's exactly what Rabbi Glasner says. He says, would we possibly say that he should eat human flesh because it is not biblically forbidden, despite the fact that it is forbidden by all basic norms of human society? Indeed, anyone who eats human flesh or feeds it to someone else is considered beyond the pale of civilization. Rather than eat meat forbidden by the Torah, would anyone entertain for a moment the notion that we, the chosen people, a wise and understanding nation, would violate such a basic norm in order to avoid a biblical prohibition? Impossible. So here Rav Glasner states that you should eat the pig, even though technically it's on. If you just look at the Torah, it's a higher law of prohibition, but the basic norms of human society overrule that. And then there's kind of a metaphor to think about this principle that there's the Torah, which is a boat, and it's riding over the waves of common sense morality. That there's what the common sense morality is, and that's what everyone else is keeping. And then we have to keep that, and we also have to keep the Torah, which is riding above that. So just a few discussion questions, or just any other question. One that, like Bill was saying, how can we ensure that halacha stays aligned with ethical standards in a changing world? What are some examples from our life that can reflect this tension between Torah and morality? Do you agree with this metaphor of the boat and the water line? And then how far does this principle go? That what if the rest of the society is saying like that the shechita is considered immoral? So what do people think?
Well, I'll throw out that the whole idea of being Shomer Shabbos and not using electricity and so forth on Shabbat. And in the world we live in, it's becoming more and more difficult to do so. People live in high-rise buildings where they need to take an elevator to get up and down. We're very connected electronically all the time, from medical devices and so forth. I'm wearing a Fitbit watch, which is always checking my heart rate. I assume I should technically take that off on Shabbat. But what if you're wearing a device that your doctor wants to monitor your heart rate? It's more and more difficult in today's world to be truly Shomer Shabbos in a traditional way.
Yeah, that's a great point. How there's different societal norms and could be moral or could just be just the technicality of things that there's the technology that we're using, and it's a great point.
Can I say something? What you might think is, or some parts of society would think is immoral or unethical. In Judaism, we could find it's ethical and moral. For example, some people might think that a judge, a dayan, a woman cannot be on a beit din. But I know many judges, Orthodox or even ultra Orthodox or Haredi women judges, who understand the fact that in the secular system they can be judges, but in the halachic system they can't. They understand it and they agree with it. Whereas someone else might think that it's immoral for a woman today who could be a judge in a secular court and not in a Jewish beit din. So it's relative.
So on that,
Yeah, I
on
think.
that, on that
Mhm.
point, the issue of accepting women's testimony strictly in halacha, in a Jewish court of law, a woman's testimony is not supposed to be accepted. And Rabbi Herzog, the late Rabbi Herzog, the chief rabbi, the first chief rabbi of Israel, the grandfather of the current president, wrote a whole treatise saying that should change. He adopted Rabbi Glasner's view and said, how can we live in a society where we accept women judges in secular world and then say, but their testimony is not reliable in a Torah world? That's hypocritical. He felt that's very hypocritical. And if the only reason why Chazal said that women's testimony is not acceptable is because they were not as educated maybe, or they could not be relied upon. And if we say that no, that we do accept them in all fields, in law, in accounting, in leadership,
Medicine, yeah.
right, medicine,
Yeah.
then it's almost contradictory to say, oh, but in halacha we won't accept them. And he advocated and he wrote. He wanted there to be a new Shulchan Aruch saying women's testimony is acceptable. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to get a lot of other rabbis in his time on board. But he stuck to his guns. He was very strong about that issue. So
Another potential thought experiment that might be more similar to the butcher case, something that my mother suggested is now electric cars are becoming very popular and are considered better for the environment. And what if we reach a point where everyone is using electric cars, and it's really viewed as totally immoral to use a gas powered car because it's bad for the environment. So what would Rabbi Glasner say, and how would he use this principle in that case? Because that can maybe be a more modern example. Now, I don't think we're at that point yet. I think it's still very acceptable, right, to use a gas powered car, but
It
who
depends
knows?
what you ask, but we won't go there. Okay.
Maybe in the future, in 50 years, but that's definitely not the point. That we're not at that stage yet, but that could just be a theoretical example.
but it goes to Gary's point about saving lives, right? So if the scientists say, if we don't all switch to electric cars, then we are basically going to destroy our world in 100 years, and we're going to cause such terrible um, destruction to the ozone layer, right? So it goes to like values which underlie Judaism of inhabiting the world, making sure it's safe, making sure it's not hazardous. And so if we reach that point, like you say, maybe we're not there yet now, but let's say, all the major scientific bodies of the world say, in order to save this world, we need to also, I think he would agree that halacha incorporates that idea, and now it's almost like a halachic obligation that you have to get an electric car.
Any other final ideas that people want to, or comments that people want to share? Okay, so
Well, I have an example. In Halacha, if a non-Jew converts, he is no longer halachically related to his siblings. And if you have a brother and sister, non-Jews, and each one converts to Judaism halachically, then theoretically they're not brother and sister anymore. They say ger kitinok dami. A non-Jew is like a newborn baby. He's in that case, they're not related to their parents. They're not related to their siblings. They're not even related to their children if they happen to have children. So theoretically, a brother and sister then who converted could marry, but the rabbis have forbidden it, even though halachically they can't, because the outside world would see it as incest. So I think that's an example of taking into account what the outside world considers moral or ethical.
Good example. Good.
yeah, that is a good example. Sure. Okay, so thank you everyone for listening, and this was in honor of my grandfather, Elhanan Leibowitz Zichrono Livracha, and I didn't get the chance to know him, but from what my father told me and my family's told me, that he was very dedicated to looking at going into debates about Judaism and really looking at all the different views in Judaism, and really going into these types of interesting moral and ethical questions and looking at Judaism in this perspective. So may this lesson be in his memory.
Amen.
Thank you.
Amen.
Yasher
Yasher koach.
Yasher koach, Neve.
She's car.